evening, everybody. I want to say thank you all so much for coming. This is our launch of the Mo Club webinar series brought to you by the Mo Club. That's the myoptimalhealthclub.org. And the point of the Mo Club is we are in business to provide support to people who live with chronic illness or disability and helping them to leverage their assets and abilities over their limitations. And I'm all about helping people learn how to live a bigger, better life than they live today, in spite of whatever health challenge they might have. And that's what I believe I call optimal health, is like maximizing your ability for wellness within the limitations that you currently live with. Okay, so the Mo Club, we're pretty excited about launching this webinar, this monthly webinars event, and we are thrilled to have Jason with us. I have the pleasure tonight of introducing our presenter, chronic illness coach and author Jason Reid. Jason was diagnosed with both Crohn's disease and arthritis at an early age, but he lived his dream of becoming a journalist and a television producer in spite of those early onset conditions. He would eventually become head of news and information at a national TV network, all while running back and forth to the bathroom every single day of his life. Now, those of you who know me, you know that I approach everything with a sense of humor. Jason spent over a decade as a manager and worked with many employees who were challenged by chronic health conditions. He now runs Sick with Success. You just gotta love that. I love it. Sick with Success, a company that helps individuals and organizations deal with chronic health issues in the workplace. He is the chronic illness expert at the website jobhunt.org, job-hunt.org, and he's also the author of a brand new book called Thriving in the Age of Chronic Illness. And I have to tell you guys, the first time I laid my hands on Jason's book, I just sort of, flipped through it and scanned and stopped at mid-book. And the passage that I read was like, oh my God, how cool is that? He said that out loud in print. I felt that all my life. I felt that, and book grabbed me right away. In fact, I was so motivated by the book that I decided it was something that employers need to have. So as I also do corporate training, and I'm selling a training kit for employers to support employees with disabilities. Anyways, I included Jason's in my kit because I so believe in the power of what he has to say. But tonight, let's get down to it, Trish, down to brass tacks. Tonight, Jason is going to be talking about real-world strategies for people working with chronic illness. Welcome, Jason.
Well, thank you very much, Trish. That's a fantastic introduction. I'll try and live up to it. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is actually really exciting tonight. As Trish mentioned, I worked in the TV industry for a number of years, which, is a pretty competitive industry. So my climb up the corporate ladder, was, like for most people, a long one and had some challenges. And, I spent a fair bit of time over the years looking for career information that was geared towards somebody like me who was both ambitious and sick. And I don't know about you, I actually wouldn't mind seeing a show of hands from the feedback. How many of you have, talked to doctors or social workers or psychologists? Because that's sort of where I first went to look for the information that I wanted about, overcoming some of the challenges of working with a chronic illness. So if you guys want to do that, the feedback button is in the top left corner. And Trish, if you would be able to kindly give me the presenter tools, that would be great too. I don't think I have those right now. So what I generally found, what I generally found when I went to see these healthcare professionals for this information is that, oftentimes it was well-meaning, and it wasn't as though it was wrong, it just, it didn't work because it assumed that bosses would always be rational and that the HR person would understand what I was going through and that communication would always be flawless. And unfortunately, that's not usually the case. So tonight we're going to be talking about some real-world solutions, which leads us to our first slide. We're going to talk about some of the workplace challenges. And thank you very much for raising your hands, Tammy and Kim and Donna. I appreciate that. And I want you guys to smile using the feedback button if any of these things apply to you. I find workplace challenges include things like lack of energy. You know, I still don't have all the energy that I would like to have because of my condition. You know, and often I found that my employers didn't understand my condition. And sometimes, you know, you get into difficult relationships with your boss. Finding the right job can be kind of tough too, because you want, you know, something that suits your personality, but hopefully something that's relatively secure. And the other things I found were, you know, communicating needs in an effective way can be very difficult at times. And sometimes there's just a general frustration, you know, where you're going through things and, you know things aren't working out and you're not sure exactly why. So hopefully through the course of this webinar, it might, you know, give you some ideas for, you know, some of the actual issues you might be having. And thank you for all those smiles. That's great. It's good to know that I'm not alone here. So the main purpose of the webinar is to get you to start thinking strategically. And part of this means understanding the right questions to ask yourself so you can figure out how your workplace works, how your boss works, and even how you work. So as we move on to the next slide, secrets to successful strategies. It's so important to be able to accurately assess the situation. And one of the difficult things is that we know that when people get angry or upset or irritated, this sort of stuff keeps us from thinking clearly. And we all know how emotional and frustrating having a chronic health condition can be, frankly. You know, we're often tired, we may be in pain, we may be worried about what people think about us, and sometimes, you know, our medication causes, you know, mood swings. I've had that happen to me too. So the first suggestion I would like to make to you, if you find your emotions are keeping you from going forward, or if you spend a lot of time and energy worrying, one of the best things that I've found is actually to meditate. Because if you practice meditation regularly for 8 weeks or more, it will literally change your brain pathways and allow you to think more clearly. And in particular, what I'm talking about is something called MBSR, which is called mindfulness-based stress reduction. I've got it at the bottom of the slide, MBSR. Now, this is something that was developed by the University of Massachusetts, and it was developed to help people like us who have serious health issues, you know, deal with worry and deal with our concerns and fear and everything else. And the research that's come out of this program has been phenomenal in how good it works. So one of the great things is the classes are usually low cost or even free. Many hospitals run MBSR programs, so you can always phone your hospital up, or you can Google MBSR and the name of your town or city and see if there's any classes near you. Again, they're often free. Sometimes they're very low cost. And one more housekeeping item, for anything that I mention here, any resources or anything that you know, you don't get a chance to write down, if you have a question, please email me at jason@sickwithsuccess.com. Now, it doesn't have to be during the program. It can be afterwards, whatever, but I will help you get the resources that you're looking for. We will move on to the next slide, which is our strategies. So as you notice here, if you're watching, the first 3 strategies, which is understand your workplace, number 1. Number 2, understand your boss. Number 3, understand your needs. These are all strategies focused on assessing your situation, right? And that's how important that is, to understand your situation well. And the last 2, which is communicate strategically and manage your energy, you'll want to stay tuned for those because there's a lot of information in those that you've probably never read about or probably haven't heard of, and they're really valuable. So I encourage you to stay tuned to the end. So let's look at strategy number 1, understand your workplace. there are different types of work environments, and they all work in slightly different ways. So if you understand how your workplace is set up, you can really determine if it's the right workplace for you. And you can also figure out the best way to communicate with the people in your organization when you have a problem or an issue or you need an accommodation. So as you look at the slide, these are some of the questions you want to ask yourself. And this can be of either the organization you're in or maybe you're job hunting and this is an organization you're looking to join. So you want to think, is this a large organization or a small organization? Now, for large organizations, for the purposes of what we're talking about here, I'm talking about things like, for instance, government, big multinational companies, heavily unionized companies, companies that have been around a long time in sort of the industrial area. Those are kind of large organizations. So large or small organizations. The second question is this a goal-driven or procedure-driven company? Because all companies have goals, all companies follow procedures, but depending on the type of company, one may be more paramount than the other. And the last thing you want to ask yourself is this a unionized or non-unionized environment? Because obviously that's going to affect who you communicate with, how flexible the company is going to be, that sort of thing. So as we look at the next slide, we can see that, there are generally two types of organizations when you take all these things into account. There's two major ones. You've got the larger procedure-oriented organizations, again, like government or, big industry. And, if you want to know if your company is procedure-oriented, if it's heavily structured, if it's bureaucratic with rules for pretty much everything, then it's probably a procedure-oriented company. And the benefits of these types of companies is that generally they have really good benefit packages, good medical packages. Often they have better job security, and usually you get a fair number of sick days. However, there are drawbacks to these organizations. They may be lacking flexibility in certain areas. Because they have rules that are written down about almost everything, if you want to devise a creative solution, they may not have the flexibility to do that for you. That's one thing. The other drawback is there is a tendency for these type of organizations to frustrate people with goal-oriented tendencies. And I'm sort of one of these people. I like to get things done, and I don't like a lot of paperwork, and I don't like a lot of procedure. So those type of organizations I find really sap my energy, which is generally why I don't work for those type of organizations anymore. But that's just me. That's my personality. So that's the procedure-oriented workplace. Now, on the other hand, if you work for an organization that stresses results and efficiency, and they just want you to get the job done however you can do it, then your organization is probably more goal-oriented. Now, the benefits of this sort of organization is that you usually have an energized work environment because you're usually in there with a whole bunch of achievers, and there's usually a pretty good energy going on. And there's sometimes the opportunity for more flexibility and creative solutions because there aren't as many policies that are written down. That doesn't necessarily mean they will be flexible, but there is an opportunity for them to be flexible. The drawbacks with these type of organizations is sometimes there are fewer benefits, sometimes fewer sick days, and less job security too. So if you're trying to convince a goal-oriented company to do something like let you work from home or have flexible hours, one of the most effective ways you can do this is show them how this will allow you to achieve the company's goals more efficiently, right? If you can show that you can make more sales calls or get more done while still being available to interact and teleconference, you might be surprised by how quickly those type of companies might go for that solution. But really the most important reason you want to ask this question is to make sure you're in the right type of job and in the right type of company. If you're goal-oriented, you want to get things done, being in a procedure-oriented company is going to drag your energy down. On the other hand, if you like a lot of structure and security in your job, a goal-oriented organization may make you a little nervous or stressed out. So the goal here is just don't pick a job or industry because somebody else thinks you should. Do something where you can be the person that you are, and you'll find you have a lot more energy. Okay, so now that we've analyzed your particular work environment, why don't we look at workplaces as a whole, as I switch the slide here. A lot of people are actually really shocked to realize that a third of the workforce has at least one chronic health condition. So what this means is for every 3 people you see at work, one of them has some sort of chronic illness, whether it's asthma, diabetes, heart disease, or whatever. Now that's a lot of people. So oftentimes we kind of think we're alone with this, but there's a lot of us out there. And you would think that because there are so many of us out there, that companies would have a better understanding of chronic illness than they do. But there's a problem in that sickness has changed dramatically over the past few years, but our society has been very slow to catch up with the change. So I'd love to see a show of hands here, the number of people who have, had their coworkers treat their chronic condition like it's the flu, or if you've had coworkers, say to you, well, you don't look sick, or you've had people wonder why you just can't get cured. That's great seeing a show of hands because, man, this used to happen to me all the time. You'd get people asking these questions, and, you kind of think, are you out of your mind? But the thing is, we haven't changed our ideas about illness. In fact, as we look at the next slide, we can see there's actually been a huge change. Because up until very recently, chronic illnesses were relatively rare. So when people got sick, they tended to get what we call acute conditions. And this is, stuff like the flu, for instance. It also includes, things like tuberculosis and more serious stuff. But, something like the flu is a really good example. And acute illnesses tend to be predictable because they're usually a result of an infection, so you either get better or you die. It's really predictable. And it's also temporary for the same reason. And we also know that people who get the flu or other diseases like that, you can tell they're sick by looking at them. These are visible diseases. And these are the ones you see on the left-hand side, the characteristics. But if you look at the right-hand side of the slide, under the characteristics of chronic illness, you'll notice that not only is it different, but it's completely the opposite. The characteristics of chronic illness are completely the opposite of what we're used to. And it doesn't matter about whether we're talking about depression or arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease or many of the other chronic illnesses. They do tend to be unpredictable. So you have flare-ups and remissions of these types of diseases. They tend to be invisible. I mean, a lot of chronic illnesses people can't see when you're sick. And they're also long-lasting. As we know, many of them are incurable. So in my book, Thriving in the Age of Chronic Illness, I actually spend a fair bit of time on this subject because really it's at the root of many of the problems we have at work and the reasons why we're not being understood. And as I've looked into this, I've also come to the conclusion that many companies are actually kind of afraid of chronic illness, and here's why. Number one, companies like certainty. They have a hard time accepting that diseases are unpredictable in long term because they don't want to deal with uncertain stuff. They want to know, can you work? Are you not? Are you healthy? Are you not healthy? And the other thing is, number two, companies like to have control. And when a disease is invisible, they lose that control. And they start to become a little nervous and maybe a little paranoid, some of the managers, about being taken advantage of. Because, unfortunately, we still live in a world that thinks if you don't look sick, you probably aren't. So, yeah, we're going to talk about the best ways to educate your employer when we get to the communication section. But before then, I just want to offer you a really neat opportunity that can go a long way in helping your boss understand your challenges. As I just mentioned, my book, Thriving in the Age of Chronic Illness, it's a guide not only for people like us who work with a chronic health condition, but there's also a special section for managers and HR people and executives, and I put it there to help them come to grips with this new type of illness. And the great thing is I speak to them in a way that they understand. I talk about the business case. And I think that, there's a lot of really important information in this book. So I wanted to make this special exclusive offer now to everybody who's listening. So for $40, which includes delivery, I will send you 2 books. I will send one book to you, and I will send a separate copy in a separate package to your boss. Now, before everybody out there gasps and stares into space, which is what people usually do, when I suggest sending their boss a copy of this book, I want to let you know kind of the cool way we're going to do this. So when your boss gets the book, it's going to be packaged to look like it's part of a free book promotion. There's going to be an order form in the package, so it looks like I'm asking them to buy more books for their company. And the great thing about this is they're not likely to trace it back to you. There's nothing really that's going to connect you to the book that they're going to get. Now, of course, your boss may not read the book cover to cover, but I can tell you there's probably a 90% chance they're going to browse it, just out of curiosity. I always browsed everything that came across my desk. And the cool thing is the chapters in this book are only like a page or two long, and they've got some pretty provocative titles, as Trish knows. So this is going to get them reading, and before they know it, they've probably glanced through about half of the book or more and realized, hey, there's a lot about this stuff I didn't know. And since it's written with them in mind, they're going to read what's in it for them, but that's also going to help you. So if you want to take advantage of this offer...
And I'm really excited about that offer, Jason. Thank you so much for bringing that to our participants. I got to tell you that way back when, after I was diagnosed and lost my job as a result of my diagnosis, I really could have used your book back then.
It's a great tool, but people, I can understand why people are a little bit afraid to, take it and plop it down on their boss's desk because they don't want their boss to think that, you're kind of telling them how to do their job. So this is kind of a neat way I thought that we could get around that we could get this book into the right hands to help people, but also not have that trail where suddenly your boss is wondering why you're giving them this book. So if you're interested in this offer, the email address is on the slide. You can go to sickwithsuccess.com/boss, and we'll be putting up a slide later on, too, if you don't get a chance to write it down. Or you can just email me, again, at jason@sickwithsuccess.com if you're interested in this, and we can get those off to you. So before I go on, Tracy, do we have any questions or anything we should get to for our next strategy?
Actually, yes. I wanted to let you know that we have a gentleman by the name of Neil, Dr. Burgess, I should say, in the conference room with us, and he was commenting about how when he was diagnosed with Crohn's, 12 years ago, doctors didn't understand what his pains were, and didn't understand that he only had pain from 4 p.m. to 7 a.m. And clearly he learned to read his own body. But then recently, he's found out that he's allergic to certain foods. And I have to wonder, is there, for people with Crohn's, is there some prevalence of food allergies in there, Jason, in your experience?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer, just because there are so many questions still with Crohn's. I don't think there's any evidence that I'm aware of about a lot of specific foods causing it. Although I know there's been some issue with some bacteria that's traced back to hamburger that may have an effect. But what I do find is that certain types of foods will aggravate it, if nothing else. One of the things I've just done recently is stop eating a lot of prepared foods. And I just find that, for me personally, I'm not saying this will happen to everybody, but I just find that it's just easier on my system.
And Neil also wanted to make a point that it's just doctors need to be more educated in their assessments and their diagnosis of especially chronic pain conditions. A lot of people with chronic pain conditions are dismissed, right?
Neil, that is an excellent point. And even diagnosis too. I mean, for 2 years, it took me 2 years to get diagnosed, and I was actually in front of some of the best specialists in Canada. And for a long time, I was told that, this was a kid when I got it, I was basically told that, I was lying. My parents were told that, I was a troubled child and I was pretending to be sick. Okay, and thank you very much, Neil, for that question. So why don't we move on to strategy 2, which is understand your boss. Because, in most workplaces, the relationship you have with your direct boss is the one that will most affect your happiness at work and your career prospects. And I find, if you understand your boss, the way they work and some of the things that they have to deal with in their job, sometimes you'll actually be less likely to take things personally and get upset about some of the decisions they make and some of the things they might do. And even more so, you'll likely be able to communicate a little bit better with them and ultimately make both your lives happier. So I'll talk about a couple of things here. It's important to know that work is a really complicated environment, and almost everybody in every organization and every business has some sort of conflicting priorities where they're supposed to do one thing, but then they're supposed to do this other thing that sometimes conflicts, right? So, for instance, managers are responsible for making sure they're engaging their employees and for motivating them and for making sure that their departments are following proper health and safety and disability laws. But on the other hand, the same managers also have to keep costs down. They have to constantly increase productivity. They've got to do all those things that make the accountants happy. So, we all have to realize that, your boss has a boss too, and sometimes, a manager is allowed some leeway to do what they feel is right in a certain situation, and other times they're just kind of forced to go by the book, and there's not much they can do. So the more you can understand that, and the more you can understand how decisions are made in your particular organization, the better off you'll be when it comes time to communicate your needs. The other thing to be really aware of, particularly when you have a new boss, is that each manager's preferences are different. Some managers like a general overview of things, and they just prefer go out and talking to people. But then there's other managers who like stuff that's really detailed and written down. And this may sound like a really kind of funny thing to be bringing up in a forum about chronic illness, but I'm amazed at how many of my coaching clients actually have issues with their bosses that stem from not understanding this whole dynamic. And what will happen is people will tend to take it personally when their work routine has changed, not realizing that it's just the way their boss handles information. They don't want to be told anymore. They want it written down. But if suddenly you find that you have to do all this extra detail work and write all these extra reports, you'll get frustrated because your energy is low and you're not sure you can keep up, right? And that becomes a problem. So here's a strategy that I've developed with my clients when this occurs. For the first week or two, do everything your new boss wants exactly the way they want it. Don't complain or tell them why you can't do it. Just move other stuff to the side if you have to concentrate on what they want specifically. And then once you've shown them that you can do the job the way they want it, it becomes much easier to sit down with them and discuss how time-consuming this new stuff is. And my coaching clients, when they do this, they're actually surprised with how this works. Because once you've impressed your boss with the ability to follow instructions, they're actually a lot more open to hearing your side of the story. So again, what will typically happen is you have this communication problem, and there's bad feelings, and there's extra work, and people get stressed, and then their health flares up, and then it becomes an issue with their health when really it's a work problem. So it's important to understand the difference between what's a work problem ultimately and what's a health problem.
That's a really, really excellent distinction. Jason, and ultimately, and I find this too with clients, that much of the time when we are challenged by within our interactions with people around us, it isn't, 9 times out of 10, it isn't, the challenge is not so much attitude or discrimination or insensitivity as it is a relationship issue, right? It's not necessarily directly about the illness, right?
Absolutely.
So the same is true at work, obviously.
Yeah. And, an easy way for you to figure out whether your problem is a work problem or a health problem is just ask yourself this simple question. If I were healthy, would this issue still be a problem for me? And if the answer is yes, even if it's a problem just a little bit, then what you really want to do is try to fix the problem, if you can, without bringing your health issues into it. because you want to try and address the root cause of the issue rather than try and make it about your illness if it's not about your illness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I love that strategy. That's such an easy filter to say, would this still be a problem if my health wasn't a factor?
It's easy, but you know what? It's so, again, when you have the tide of life, and we've sort of talked about this, Trish, when there's so many things happening, sometimes the easy stuff is very easy for us to overlook because we're dealing with so much other stuff, and we have a chronic illness. So, to be self-aware is really important.
Excellent.
So do we want to get to some of the sexy stuff here, the getting hired or promoted?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay. So I put this in here because, obviously these are things that a lot of people want to hear about. Hiring people is a complicated process because there's a lot of factors involved in deciding who's the right person for the job. In a procedure-oriented organization, the biggest factors are often things like seniority, which is very similar to experience, which is why I didn't put experience on the slide. And education is another big one for procedure-oriented organizations. Now, in goal-oriented organizations, they're looking probably more for up-to-date skills, whether you're a fit for the job, whether you have the right personality. And since we don't have time to go through all of these for a moment, I want to pick two that are sort of really important, particularly to me and I think to everybody else here, and that's education and skills. Because there was a recent survey, a really big survey of chronically ill workers here in Canada. And what they found was this. A third of the people they surveyed, 1 in 3, said no when they were offered additional training and education by their company. And this is a serious problem because education and skills are so important now. And you know what? I have to tell you that this is actually something that I did myself once. I turned down a fantastic opportunity to do executive leadership training because I was worried. It was it wasn't a month long. It was a week-long intensive training out of town. I was worried about my diet because I have a restricted diet. I was worried about my energy levels. Would I be able to keep up? And you know what? I was kind of just embarrassed and scared, and I didn't do it. And I've regretted it for a long time. And I was, at the time, I was a manager at a TV station. I was doing my job really well. I was top of the world, but I was still scared. And looking back on it, they would have accommodated me. They would have. But I made the excuses that I was too busy, that I had too much on my plate, and I didn't do it. So I want you guys to learn from my mistakes here. And if ever you're offered training and development opportunities, please take it. Find other things that you can sort of put it aside if you've got too much on the go, because it's just so important these days. People who don't keep up with their skill set and their education are going to be left behind, and they're going to find themselves unemployed eventually. So that's my advice on education and training.
I have to say, and I know that you're not finished yet, but I just wanted to take a moment to interject that I cannot tell you how impressed I am and with how well you have dissected all of the dynamics that are going on in this situation. It's almost as though you've lived in that situation for many years.
Yeah, it's surprising, isn't it?
Wow! Honestly, I'm thrilled with the content, and I'm sure that if I could have some applause there from our attendees, there are so many things that you're bringing up here that were passing thoughts for me, or obsessions when I'm trying to sleep when I was still working and I was in that really toxic environment. That if somebody would have, I'm seeing lots of applause there.
Thank you.
If somebody would have been able to break down for me back then, honest to God, my actions, I still would have sued their asses off after they let me go. But I think that I would have understood, and I might have walked away with a lot less resentment at the time, if I would have been empowered that information. So please continue and continue to fill our brains with some wonderful knowledge.
Well, thank you, and thank you everybody else for that applause. This is actually such a great thing for me because, obviously, like many of you, I've gone through a lot of interesting experiences in my life, and some of them have been negative, but doing this is a way to look back and be able to take all of the negative things that have happened and really put a positive spin on it and help other
Absolutely.
people. So I've got to tell you, this is just a wonderful thing, just for me personally, and the feeling that I get being able to relate to you guys. So one of the big questions that comes up, if not the big question, is, should I tell my employer I'm sick?
Oh yeah, that's a big one, Jason.
So I've searched around and I've found some, I guess we'll call it etiquette. And why don't I go through these? Number one, as you see at the top, it's best not to disclose your illness in a resume or cover letter. Because I've seen studies that have been done in both North America and Europe, and the letters and the resumes that have those disclosures in them, people don't get called in for interviews. And statistically, the number is actually really high. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you do that. And generally, there's no reason to do it. So try to avoid that. You also generally don't want to bring up your illness in a first interview unless it's hugely relevant or unless it's really obvious and you know that they're thinking in the back of their mind, like, what's going on with this person. The first interview is really a chance for you to impress them and show why you are the right person to hire for the job. Mm-hmm. So a better time, if you're going to disclose your illness, is in what we call the negotiation phase, which is, pretty much after they've said that they are interested in hiring you, but before you actually sign the employment letters. Now, this doesn't mean that you should disclose it regardless. There are some guidelines. You may wish to disclose it, your illness, if it's going to noticeably affect your job performance in the next few months. Because chances are you're going to be on some sort of probationary period anyways. So if you want to have, a long and hopefully fruitful relationship with that company, it's just kind of proper etiquette to actually tell them, if you're going to have anything major coming up the next month or two. You'll also need to disclose your illness if there are insurance or safety issues. I'll get into what that is. In the United States in particular, a lot of companies have private insurers, and often you need to take health tests or answer a health questionnaire to get insured. So obviously when you're dealing with an insurance company, you've got to tell them what your illnesses are. You're not going to be covered. And also in some jobs, too, there are safety issues. If you're a policeman, if you're a fireman, if you're in the transportation industry, often you'll have to answer questions about your health, and sometimes you might even have to take a blood test or a urine test or whatever. And those things, you really can't get around. You just have to sort of do them. It's also thought that it's probably a good idea to let them know about your illness if you need immediate workplace accommodation. If they're going to hire you and pretty much the first day you're going to need a special type of desk set up, or if you're going to need any sort of major accommodation in terms of time or mobility or anything else, it's probably a good business etiquette to just let them know before you sign those papers. So,
Jason, Peg just piped up. One situation, she said it might be relevant to mention your disability if it's a disability-related job.
That's true. Yeah. Obviously, if it's a disability-related job, if you're applying for a position in, for instance, if it's the Arthritis Society or the Kidney Society or something like that, you're absolutely right. Where it is relevant, it's probably something that you can safely talk about too, because they're obviously not going to be in the position where they're going to discount you because of that illness. So that's actually a really awesome thing to bring up.
Thank you, Peg.
Thank you, Peg. So let's say you've had to disclose your illness, or you've decided to disclose your illness when you're applying for a new job. And the next question you get is, once they hear this, let me just move the slide here, is can you handle this job? And they're actually kind of obliged to ask this question if you've sort of brought a health concern up. And here's what you say. And this is assuming that you're reasonably confident that you can do the job and there's no major health changes on the horizon for the next little while. You know, if you're getting an operation the next day or the next week, you probably don't want to say this. But otherwise, this is what you say, and it's on the slide. Of course, no one can guarantee what their health will be like in the future, and I'm no different. However, I understand the expectations, and I am confident I can do the job. This is why this line works. That last sentence, I understand the expectations, and I'm confident I can do the job, that is what the hiring person needs to hear. They're kind of obligated to ask you this question, and that's what they need to hear. Very simply, very succinctly.
That is fabulous. And I love how you've just put it right out there. Let people know exactly what they need to say, how they can convey their sense, they're not an inability to guarantee anything, but that they understand what's expected of them and that they're confident in what they can do. That's amazing. Thank you for that, Jason.
And it also gets
everybody
them to
should
realize
write that one down.
It also gets them to realize, it's not just you. Like, it doesn't matter if you're healthy today. If they have somebody come in, today to do that job who's healthy, there's no guarantee that that person's going to be healthy in a week or a month. I mean, human health isn't something that we can guarantee. So it's kind of a nice thing to kind of slide in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's move now to the two biggest mistakes that happen during a job interview. And I've interviewed probably hundreds of different people for different types of jobs when I was in journalism and TV. So I've seen a lot of mistakes. And I'm going to talk about two of the biggest ones because this will sometimes come up for those of us who have chronic health conditions. And one of the first questions in a job interview will be, why do you want this job? And people will often respond with what's in it for them. They'll say, well, I like the pay, or the job is convenient, or it's not too stressful for me, right? But most companies and bosses don't want to hear that answer because there's nothing in it for them in that answer. Even though that question that they give you sounds like it's about you, you need to show how your bosses will benefit if they hire you. So, for example, if you were applying for a customer service job and they were to ask you, why do you want this job? You'd want to answer with something like this. You'd want to say, well, I'm excited about this job because I really enjoy interacting with people and helping them resolve problems. See the difference? You have to think of every question as a way to sell yourself for the job. And the great thing about that is when you start thinking about that, when you're thinking about what you bring to the job and your skills and your personality, you'll recognize how valuable you are. You'll have this feeling of value, and it will put you in a strong and resourceful frame of mind. Even if you're sick and even if you haven't worked in it a while, thinking about the value that you bring to the job is something that's very empowering. Because what you don't want to do, and here's the second biggest problem, is appear needy or desperate. And people might appear desperate because they've got large bills to pay or debts. They may be under financial pressure or personal pressure to do the job. And the problem is that nobody wants to hire desperate people because they're inherently unpredictable. And people in business, as we've learned, don't like unpredictability. They like certainty. Now, similar to desperation is the whole concept of being needy. So if you come across as somebody who's really desperate to be liked or somebody who needs constant reassurance or praise, this could conceivably kill your chances at certain jobs. Because if the person hiring you feels like they're going to be constantly needing to reassure you and give you praise, they're not going to want to hire you because it's too much work for them. And if you're somebody who desperately needs to be liked, this will kill you if you're applying for a management position or a supervisory position, because sometimes in those positions you have to make unpopular decisions. And if you have this overwhelming need to be popular over being respected, then it may be a bad idea for them to hire you. So let's move along here to strategy 3, understand your needs. This isn't something we talk enough about, and it's a messy subject because as human beings we spend a lot of time at work and we have a lot of personal needs. But being able to differentiate between personal and professional needs is really important. Because to a certain degree, we all want praise and love and friendship and understanding, and if we're lucky, we'll get a certain amount of this at work. We'll have friends in the workplace and it'll be really supportive. But the problem happens is we get so wrapped up in our work that it becomes the sole place where we get these needs filled, and then we start to expect it. And this becomes an even bigger problem when we're sick, and this is something that's happened to me, is, when you don't have a lot of energy, it's easy to start neglecting an outside social life because hanging out with the people at work is less effort, right? And we're often surrounded by people we like and have similar interests. But if work is the only place where our personal needs are being met, this is a problem, because if you get promoted, you may have to do things in your job that are unpopular with your friends. So if you're putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, even a few minor changes in your job can seem quite devastating personally, and it becomes really difficult to deal with because you've actually got very little control over it. And this is something that a lot of people don't realize. It's not your job. It's actually the company's job. You have a career, but it's the company's job, and they can actually change it to a fair degree. So it's really important to get as many of your personal needs met outside of work. So let's move on to communicating strategically. I'd like to see, by a show of hands, how many of you have had to talk to somebody at work or at school and try and explain yourself and your illness and had sometimes a difficult time doing it. Because, oh yeah, everybody's hands going up. Tammy, Linda Grace, Donna. We've all been there, right? And it's kind of challenging because, as we know, people don't really understand what we go through a lot. So, first of all, if you have to communicate anything about your illness to somebody out at work, whether it's your boss or an HR person, first thing you want to do, this is sort of obvious, but you want to be somewhere where it's quiet and the person you're talking to is away from distraction, because distractions will kill you. And you want to be someplace private, obviously, because you don't want people overhearing. Now, we all know that chronic health problems and their symptoms can be really complex because a lot of us have more than one illness, and sometimes it's hard to know what illness is causing what symptom and all that stuff. So what you want to do as much as possible is state your health issue in the simplest way that you can. I've learned this the hard way. Most people don't want a long explanation, and they won't remember it. They just sort of look back at you kind of stunned.
And the other piece is, Jason, the longer the explanation, the more likely you're going to lose their attention.
Absolutely. A great way to try and simplify things if you're having problems is to stay focused on the job. And what I mean by that is spend a couple of moments and think, okay, what does this mean for my job? And try and communicate it in a way that's around your job. So for example, saying something like, if you're talking to your HR person or your boss, saying, I have an operation on my eye next month. I'm going to be away for 3 days of work, and I'll have a 2-week period where I'll only have vision in one eye. Very simple. Lets them know exactly what this means to them. They can decide, if the vision in one eye is an issue, to change your job or whatever, but you haven't gone into all of the reasons why your eyes are a problem. It's just basically, here it is, this is what I'm doing, this is how long I'll likely be out, this is how it may affect my work. Nice and simple.
Mm-hmm. Most important, I think, being, Jason, how it's going to affect my work.
That's very, very true. And of course, if you have, bosses or HR people that you're close to and they are concerned and they ask you more about your illness, if you feel comfortable with that, of course you can tell them. But it's always good to be really simple and really general first, and then if they need the detail, then they can ask you for it. Quickly, just to talk about responsibility. Now, we all know that sometimes we can do everything in our power to take care of ourselves, and we still get sick, right? We can't do anything about it. But the problem is some people still don't get that, and they assume that we must have done something to cause our illness. So if that happens, if we can just kind of gently remind them, without going into a lot of detail, that we're doing everything we can do and we're following our doctor's suggestions and we're getting rest, at least that acknowledges that we're taking responsibility to get better. And that just makes the manager feel better, even if they're, kind of ignorant about what your illness is about. Just sort of throwing that out there will sometimes just calm everything down.
Mm. And one thing I'd like to throw in there, Jason, if you don't mind, is one of the things that I work with clients on is that communication. Yes, keep it simple, but it all still has to be with confidence. And going back to your previous slide, and without whining, you know, we need to convey our needs with confidence, without whining about it. You know, we don't drive people away.
That's very true. And you know what? I often think that a great way to communicate in some ways is as if you were the CEO, not necessarily talking down to people, but with that sort of kind of detached professionalism and confidence, saying, this is
Yeah,
the reality.
object.
And yeah, absolutely.
In fact,
Being
if the
totally objective.
boss hearing emotion between every word you're saying, he is going to get defensive and shut down. But if you're coming across with objectivity, you will be respected. You're far more likely to be respected.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, emotion is sort of the enemy of reason and the enemy of communication. And you know, you bring up a really good point. Is even if it's us that are getting emotional, what tends to happen is it triggers an emotional reaction in the person we're talking to, and suddenly you get two emotional people, and they're not going to be able to communicate well.
Mm.
So speaking of communication, what I want to talk about right now is the best way for you to communicate with your company on a big scale when it comes to educating them about chronic illness. And that is to volunteer on your wellness committees, or maybe it's a health and safety committee you have at work, or your diversity committee. And the great thing about doing this, even though it seems like extra work, is that these are forums where you can actually talk about some of the issues that people with chronic illness have. And it's a time where everybody sits down, they're interested in new ideas, and they're actually open to listening. So as long as you go in and don't, if you just go in and talk about the stuff that relates to you and push your own agenda, that won't work as well. But if you go in, if you listen to people, if you come up with interesting ideas and fold that all into understanding chronic illness as a whole, you'll be really surprised at how people listen to you and what an influence you might have. So we'll move on quickly to strategy 5, which is our last one, and this is energy management. And I'm going to just go through this fairly quickly. The philosophy behind this, it's a model used by elite athletes and top executives. But you know what? Having looked at it, it is awesome for those of us who are sick and have issues with energy. Here's how it works. We've all heard of time management, right? Everybody talks about managing your time to get more done. But time management has one major flaw. Just because you've arranged a time to do something doesn't mean you'll have the energy when that time comes to do it. And this is something that happened to me all the time. So the question becomes, how do we get more energy in our lives and manage the energy we do have? And the idea is we need a balance of both stress and recovery in different areas of our lives. Thinking about these areas, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, think of them like a muscle. You have to exercise all of these areas to build stamina and energy. And you also need rest in these areas too. So you're probably saying, well, this sounds obvious, right? But how many of us consciously plan to make sure we lead balanced lives? How many of us with chronic health conditions really push ourselves past our comfort levels emotionally and spiritually and schedule time to create and nurture positive relationships and stimulating hobbies or volunteer or work on projects that really mean something to us? Because this system isn't just about spending too much energy, but it's about spending extra energy in the right places. And one of the myths that we've grown up with chronic illness is that we have a given amount of energy to start the day, and each time we spend it, we lose that energy. But that's not necessarily true. We often find that spending energy in the right place gives us more. So I'll give you a quick example of this. Probably the biggest well of energy that is untapped that you have is likely spiritual energy, if you are like most people. And when I say spiritual, I'm not talking necessarily about religion or about ghosts, but about the things that you really value and about the things that are really important to you and make you feel good. And, for some people that may be family. For others, it's helping other people. For me, one of the really strong spiritual values I have as a coach is helping people be the best they can be. And that's just something in me. That's part of my personality. But the great thing is, in doing the job that I do now that involves that, I can work 10 or 12-hour days, and I'm not exhausted because it's something that actually gives me more energy, because it's something really important to me. If I was working as an accountant somewhere, nothing against accountants, but that's just not my values and the type of thing that I do, I wouldn't last 4 hours in an office. So it's worth noting that, you know, the way we live our lives and what we choose to do can actually have a huge impact on our energy, Trish.
Oh, man, do I agree with you. I mean, there's a huge difference for me between, let's say, sitting down to build a website. Oh, my God, I can just dive in and have so much fun and creativity and exploring new toys and all of that. And but if you were asked me to sit down and do my taxes, which no, not a good thing, not a good thing. That would kill me. Yeah.
It's funny how that works, doesn't it?
Isn't it? Yes, it is. But I think you're right. I mean, I know you're right. There is definitely some learning, huge learning there in terms of planning your lives around your values so that you're maximizing your ability to cope with the stresses that are, you know, inherent in life, right? While still being able to be productive and manage your chronic illness at the same time. Wow, this has been amazing, just amazing, Jason. We will definitely be hearing from you again. We will be dragging you back for sure. I love this. I encourage everybody, please go to sickwithsuccess.com and pick up Jason's book. Take him up on the offer to send a second copy to somebody that you would love to send a message to. I love that strategy. I love it's sinfully deceitful, at the same time really could be potentially powerful, and it is amazing. Yeah, and you see, thanks coming in the chat window, Jason, from our attendees today. This has been amazing. We will look forward to hearing how you and your coaching practice roll out with your new book. And the next time you've got a book, I'm sure that you'll have to be one of your first stops will be to come and visit our membership. Because we just love what you have to say. I love how you say it like it is, very factually, and but you say the real stuff, and I really appreciate that too. Thank you so much, Jason, for coming today and for bringing your wisdom and knowledge and experience to our audience.
Thank you, Trish. It's been my pleasure.
Excellent. And thank you to our participants today for dropping in us and for tolerating and having patience through our technical challenges. Just want to take a moment before we wrap up to remind you all that the monthly webinar series is brought to you by the Mo Club, myoptimalhealthclub.org, and we are all about empowering people with disabilities to live life to their optimal health while they achieve success and spiritual serenity in their lives. And that is totally, and I love the statement you made, Jason, about our biggest potential for new energy is going to come from spiritual growth. I love that. Okay, so thank you so much. For those of you with us, please watch your email for next month's webinar coming up in 4 weeks. Thank you so much, and have a great night. Next time, take self-care seriously, and God bless.